When I got into cybersecurity back in the early 90s, this was a pretty small field. I was in the early days of penetration testing military systems to make sure that we were protecting our own defense data.
Boy, a lot has changed since we last got together, especially in the area of AI.
The attackers are embracing AI and using it to become even more effective at what they do. People are producing more software than they ever have before.
That speed of adoption is getting ahead of where security is at. People don't realize how organized cybercrime actually is.
Our customers are seeing dramatic increases in successful phishing attacks. Now, if we can do that in a 1-week window of time, not only find it, but also break in and get access to customer data, the attackers are definitely going to.
Well, Terry, it's exciting to meet again. And this time, boy, a lot has changed since we last got together, especially in the area of AI. So I was curious how AI is changing your world in the pen testing and security world.
I think all businesses are seeing a huge impact from AI. Certainly in cybersecurity, we're seeing it both on the attacker side of things. The attackers are embracing AI and using it to become even more effective at what they do. And we're seeing defenders rushing to implement it. It's going to change cybersecurity dramatically. Not the fundamentals. I think the fundamentals have been there for quite some time, but we're seeing everything accelerate more quickly. And so something that maybe you could have gotten away with in the past, a mistake or a coding error, those are all now coming to light more quickly, and people are producing more software than they ever have before because of AI.
So what are the benefits of some of the acceleration that you're seeing? And what are some of the specific examples where you're seeing companies more vulnerable maybe than they've ever been before?
Yeah, I think one of the things we hear a lot about the benefit of AI is that it frees up analysts or knowledge workers to offload some of the mundane, repetitive tasks. So you think about like a security operations center and where analysts are looking at alerts and clearing them one at a time, hopefully one at a time, saying this is a false positive, we've seen this before. AI is starting to automate that process so that those really basic, clearly false positive alerts are getting handled by automation. And that's freeing up analysts to look at the ones that are unusual or more interesting, maybe more serious. I think that's one of the benefits. I think another benefit is the ability to make inferences between large data sets. So maybe you have a big report output from a vulnerability scanner, and then you also have a report about the current threat landscape. How do you match up what cyber threat actors are doing or what data breaches are seeing as root causes? How do you match that up against a large inventory of hardware and software? In the past, you would probably go through line by line, and it'll be very time consuming and painstaking. And now AI can do that in seconds or minutes. Now you have to have an expert check it to make sure that AI is not selling you something that's not true. But in the past, we wouldn't even undertake some of these exercises because it was just too time consuming.
Yeah, well, that's an example where some data is structured, like what you have in a database when there's specific fields and they have meaning, versus unstructured data where you have feedback and information, and it's a lot that has to be parsed through to be able to understand and interpret it. That's really the concept of big data. And AI is now coming to save the day because you can get a lot of value from some of that unstructured data that you couldn't before. We also know that hackers are using AI as well. It's not just on the defender side. So some of the attacks are getting more automated. I heard in the news there was an example of an attack that was pretty sophisticated, but it was completely automated. And somebody set it up, obviously, but it had actually found vulnerabilities and found ways to penetrate some of those vulnerabilities. And so that's why I thought it'd be really great to have you in again and catch up on like some of what you're seeing in the field and how AI is being used both from a defense perspective and from an attacking perspective. But I think fundamentally, I think the other thing that we've seen that has shifted is companies are using software that they're building and creating. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of code that's being written nowadays by AI, either AI assisted or actually AI written. You hear terms like vibe coding, low coding, no coding. So in the past, the learning curve to write a piece of software was pretty steep, and it was very time consuming to write the software, test it, debug it, put it through some actual real life use. And now all that is collapsing down into a person with an idea saying, can you code me an app that does this? And of course, the AI says, yes, of course I can do that. And it gets started right away. And before you know it, I mean, really surprisingly, before you realize it's even possible, you've got a semi working app that needs some adjusting and tweaking and say, can you know, change this color? Can you add data labels? Can you ingest this kind of information? And it's not hard at all to get something working. The big question mark is, okay, where does this code run? What does it have access to? And is it able to protect that data in the way that we would have ordinarily expected from a commercially viable product that's had some testing?
Right.
That's a really big question mark.
Well, it's the old problem that we've always had. Developers are looking at making code that works, and making the bosses happy. Hey, we've got something that you can use. And security people are always looking at how do we protect the data? How do we protect your systems? And so if somebody's vibe coding, they have to really play both worlds because they typically don't have a software development team. The example that you had mentioned in terms of vibe coding examples, I've seen several people, none of them was this their full-time job. And they started working with AI, just asking question after question after question, and it just turned into an app, and then app turned into pulling data from multiple systems that they could never do. And then it's like, well, how can we view that information? How can we use this information? Now they're building gauges into the app, and oh, well, let's make it secure. So they say, hey, can we make an MFA multi-factor authentication prompt, for login? And then they go like, okay, it's secure. Now we can just put it up in the cloud. They pick a place to host it, and now they're rolling it out to the whole company. And all of this is happening fast from somebody who this isn't their job most of the time. Like in the examples I've seen, it's somebody that's smart that knows how to ask the right questions, and they're getting way down the fairway. And many times that speed of adoption is getting ahead of where security is at. So maybe this is a good time to talk about how companies can secure their own data as they're starting to experiment with vibe coding.
Yeah, I think as you were talking, it just occurred to me that in the past, the people who were doing the software development were probably of a certain temperament or personality. And a lot of this vibe coding is coming from the ideas people. And some of those people are not the kind of people who are going to stick with it and refine this and secure it. You know, they're on to the next big idea and the next big idea, and they're leaving this carnage behind them from a technical debt or cybersecurity perspective. But it's not all bad news. I think it's very easy to fall on one side or the other of AI. There's obviously a lot of pushback and backlash against AI. But companies who are embracing vibe coding or AI assisted coding, there's a lot that they can do to help themselves. And so what I tell people is it's kind of three phases that I recommend. The first phase is kind of a flash of the blindingly obvious, and yet it gets omitted a lot of times. So as you're writing your vibe coded app, you've gotten it to a place where you're happy, you've committed it, up into your repository, and this is your 1.0 or whatever version it is. This is a really great time to say, okay, before I start adding more features, more bells and whistles, let's do a security review. And in the past, you'd probably have to hire somebody to do that. Companies like Mile High Cyber do security reviews. Well, with the vibe coding, you can have the AI do the security review itself. Now, it's not perfect, but you'll be surprised when you stop adding features and stop telling it to do things to say, hey, can you do a security review? These are the things I'm specifically concerned about. I'm concerned about external attackers. I'm concerned about insider threat. I'm concerned about tenant separation, one customer's data being able to be accessed by a different customer. Tell it specifically what your business concerns are, which you should understand, and the app will surprise you. It'll come back with a list, maybe a very long list of security flaws that it was able to identify. In essence, it's saying, oh, I didn't know you cared about security. You've never mentioned it before. So if we're looking at security, here's a list of things that are wrong with the application. And then it'll probably say, do you want me to fix those? Which ones? And obviously you want to fix the ones that are important for your business. But anybody can do that. If you can vibe code the app, you can also ask the AI to do a security review.
Yeah, that's really good. Ask it what vulnerabilities exist. I love this concept of assumed breach, just assuming that there's cracks in the foundation. There's some form where there's probably going to be a leak, and somebody at some point is going to get into your company. And that's the protect side, is like everything you can do to protect. I think in the vibe coding end, there's a lot you can ask of, like, how could a hacker get it past our security controls, or what vulnerabilities list can you spend some time doing some deep thought into this to do a vulnerability scan, and then tell me how they could exploit those vulnerabilities. But then I think there's also ways where you can say, what behavior would be unusual and how could I get notified if something unusual happens? Because once somebody's inside, I picture like tripwires everywhere. Like inside your company, you should have tripwires everywhere. So if they do anything that's weird, or they're trying to get all the data out, and that's not normal, like if you're trying to exfiltrate data, there might be ways you can even tell the code to notify you of that, so that you can actually address, I think, the protect and the respond category, as well as just hardening the security of the product up front. So I think that's great. Great perspective.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is just telling the app what you need from a security perspective. And then once the app has done everything that it knows how to do from security review standpoint, then there are automated tools on the market. Some of them are open source, some of them cost money, but they're fairly cheap compared to a data breach. So now point some of those automated tools at the application or the system and see what additional security flaws get popped out by those automated tools. The good news is you can take the output from those tools, give it to the AI and say, this automated security testing tool said this about the application. Is that correct? Why is this vulnerability still there? I thought we did a security review. And the AI will go back and it may say, well, you're right. I missed that. Let me fix that. Or it may say, well, this is a common false positive. Here's the proof that this vulnerability doesn't actually exist in the software. And so now you've got two levels of security testing, really kind of self-service.
Yeah, so that sounds like that's level 2. You had level 1 of how you can feed information back into AI. Level 2 sounds like it's an automated pen test, which there are AI-enabled automated pen tests online that you can do. Point it to your web app and let it build a report, and then feed that into AI. So that sounds like that's another one. What would be the next level from there?
Well, the final level, I think, is having an independent human security testing company review it.
When that's as close to a physical hacker, a real brain using all of his experience and tools, that's going to go after the business or that application. And so that's really what a pen test is, right? It's using some of the same tools to simulate an actual attack, which is a lot of these automated pen tests fall short of being able to do that.
Yeah, it's one thing to have a tool and to be able to point the tool and run it and get some information. It's another thing to have the experience to say, okay, this is what's most important, or let me pull on this thread and see where I can take this vulnerability. Maybe it's not immediately vulnerable just on the surface, but if I chain together multiple security flaws, we spend a lot of time in cybersecurity talking about critical or high severity security flaws. What we're finding that AI is getting better at, but still maybe not as good right now, as of today's date, as a very good security tester or hacker, is chaining together some of those moderate or medium level vulnerabilities. Sometimes if you stack them together or combine them in such a way, you might get to what would be a critical severity impact. So the human pen tester, if he or she has enough experience, can see things that maybe the AI, as of today, things are changing. As of today, maybe the AI isn't able to put together. But I would say the other thing about jumping to the attack side, attackers are not fully manual anymore. Maybe there's somebody who is, but most of the serious threat actors that you would be concerned about are using a lot of this automation. Our customers are seeing dramatic increases in successful phishing attacks. And I think a lot of that's attributable to AI, either in how they craft the phishing emails to be more convincing and tailored to the victim, or how the attackers are using AI to automate their infrastructure management. You use this address, it gets picked up by some sort of security product, and now it's blacklisted or banned. The attackers have automated managing that infrastructure to be constantly changing, taking into account what used to would have taken them a lot of manpower. It's all automated. They're spinning up new domains. They're spinning up new cloud services. They're spinning up new versions that defy the previous signatures that were picked up.
Yeah, people don't realize how organized cybercrime actually is. We see franchises all around us in the United States. We don't think of cyber attacks really being a franchise model, but they really have gotten sophisticated, and they are using AI, and there's whole platforms, and a lot of those platforms are free, and whatever money you might make in your cybercrime activities, you just have to pay a percentage of it, and they give you the training, the AI tools, and the platforms to be able to do this. So you could just start pointing things and running scans. And so I think you're right. Like I would guess that the mass majority of attacks now are some behind some kind of automated platform. So I think what's happening is there's a certain level of security that has to be the table stakes, has to be the bare metal that at bare minimum that anyone is doing when it comes to cybersecurity. And using AI to prove and test your security, I think, is fighting fire with fire. We know they're using AI on the other end, so that's helpful. But help me understand, at what point should a company really engage like a human, like a pen tester, like your team? Like, if so, they're like, well, we've got this little application. I don't know how much of a risk it is. We're using it to pull some information or do some basic tasks, but like, do we need to go out and spend a lot of money on a pen test? Like, what kind of advice would you give a company like that, and what kind of boundaries would you maybe put on it in terms of helping them make a good decision?
Yeah, I think it's hard when you just go out to Google and search for penetration test vendors. You're going to get everything from the big, gigantic consulting firms to someone who has some really basic knowledge of how to run a tool. And so I think you need to look for people who have a depth of experience in the field, and that doesn't mean that they're necessarily expensive. You and I both work with small and mid-sized companies. And so we're constantly looking at how do we right size our services to make them affordable? How do we really address the business needs that they have? So as people are looking for help with security testing, I think they need to be looking for someone who's independent, who has that depth of experience. They care about what the customers think. Ask for customer testimonials, ask for survey results, ask for, is there anyone who can tell us their experience with you? I think those are good signs. And then there are so many cybersecurity providers. I think you also have to consider price. It's not the sole factor, hopefully, for you, but it has got to be an important factor because all of us who are business owners have limited resources, and we're trying to not focus on cybersecurity, we're focused on our business. Cybersecurity is a risk that we have to address and handle. So I would talk to them, talk to multiple vendors, and see which ones get you. Do they listen? Do they understand your business? Are they able to articulate how they're going to help you? I think those are some of the key things.
Yeah, I think that is like a lot of the commodity services that are packaged, and there's a certain, it all looks good on the proposal side of it, right? But maybe behind the end, it's really a level 2 pen test they're doing. It's really an automated digital pen test, and there's not really human intelligence and a lot of experience backing that. And again, we've validated that level 2 is there's a time and place, and in some cases that might be adequate. But I would say the business case to know whether you need to go to level 3 and find someone like you that has experience and trust and skilled, to do that type of pen test. Just know that like a human brain using all the different tools that are out there that are free, open source, doing a planned attack is going to get different results than a piece of software. Again, today we're just talking how this is changing quickly. So that actually makes me think level 2 needs to grow a lot. Like people need to be doing a lot more digital pen tests, and there's just a lot of companies that they're not doing them at all, or maybe it's an annual thing and only on part of their business. But I think there's a real need for that because those tools are getting better as well. But I think whenever you get into the custom realm, you're getting in this area like in custom development where you don't know what you don't know. And I don't know that it would be safe for a company that is putting important information in a custom built app to rely solely on a digital pen test. Like that's a good place to start. But I think at some point doing something more thorough, more in depth. And I think this might be a good time to tell our audience a little bit about your background, like what you've done, and like why are we talking to you? Why do we do so much business together?
So I'm always amazed when I go to cybersecurity conferences like RSA in San Francisco, the large amount of cybersecurity workers there are. I mean, it blows my mind that there are so many people. When I got into cybersecurity back in the early 90s, this was a pretty small field. I mean, you would see the same people and it was a small world type scenario. There are so many vendors, so many workers who touch cybersecurity in one form or another. Um, how I got into cybersecurity was I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, wanted to be a pilot, was the only reason I went to the Air Force Academy. And about halfway through my career, I found out I was not going to be a pilot. We didn't need as many pilots as we used to, and so they cranked down the restrictions on vision. Back then, I didn't wear glasses. I still had 20/20, but they made it even harder because they were trying to stem the flow of pilots going into training and just kind of control the pipeline. So I had to go into something else, and I went into signals intelligence. In the industry, we call it SIGINT. And so this is largely intercepting communications in one form or another. And when I got into SIGINT, it was largely radio waves. Not exclusively, but that was the bulk of SIGINT collection, was intercepting radio communications of one kind or another. But as I was maturing in the SIGINT world, you would hear these kind of whispers about that things were changing. And looking back now, we see it was the digital revolution. And so from the military and government side, I was part of some of the initial early days of intelligence collection that involved data collection that was not necessarily gathered over the radio waves. And so when I got out of the Air Force, I went to work at the National Security Agency, thinking I would continue on my SIGINT path, but instead I got into cybersecurity. The NSA has a dual mission of both foreign intelligence collection and also protection of US communications. And so NSA was trying to get ramped up on how do we protect our own computers and networks from these new kinds of attacks, where now we're going to collect data not from the airwaves necessarily, but from networks. And so I was in the early days of penetration testing military systems to make sure that we were protecting our own defense data. And that was, early, mid 90s, became a government employee at the NSA in 1998. And I've been in this field ever since.
Wow, that's great. Was there anything that you feel like we haven't covered that you think our audience would want to know?
I think there's maybe some unawareness or things are happening in your organization that you don't necessarily know. And so, one of the benefits we've seen, one of the anecdotes that I would share about AI and the security risks, is sometimes systems get stood up. Um, they're probably for a really good reason, and they're helpful to the workforce, and they're probably even increasing productivity, but they've been done without any security oversight. And so, on a recent penetration test where we were, paid to check to see how might a hacker break into our organization, one of the things we discovered was that they had set up an AI server, that had all their customer data in it. It was internet facing, meaning anyone on the face of the earth or the internet could connect to it and try to log in. Now, there was a username and a password, so that was good, but it wasn't a very good username and password, and we were able to guess it and get in from the internet. Now, if we can do that in a 1 week window of time, not only find it, but also break in and get access to customer data, the attackers are definitely going to exploit that vulnerability. And so, when the leadership heard this, they were like, oh, we didn't know that was happening. We were aware of this project, but we didn't realize it had been exposed to the internet. So I think, getting that third-party assessment on a frequent basis, the once-a-year pen test, it has a place, I'm sure, in the compliance world. But if you want to know what's happening with your attack surface, the things that attackers from the other side of the world can reach out and try to exploit, you need more frequent testing.
Yeah, and I think it's because everything is accelerating at a really fast clip. And as that acceleration happens, it requires us to be more nimble and move. And some of that acceleration is so positive, like there's a productive side of all of this, but you've also got to have your security in place, and pen test makes a lot of sense for doing that. I feel like everything we're doing in security, even if you're using a framework, is a little bit guesswork until you actually get a pen test to see, does it work? Like if you've not stress test your security, you don't know if it really works. You just don't get that answer until you've actually done an engagement like that. So
Yeah, I think the pen test tells you how well your security is working. Now, if you've not thought about security, if you don't have any security mechanisms in place, there are other kinds of security consulting help that you can get. Pen test is sort of for that more mature organization or trying to figure out if you are mature from a security standpoint.
well, we're seeing it more and more on insurance applications. In fact, it's become pretty standard now. So, and it can directly affect premiums and eligibility from an insurance perspective. And insurance is, I mean, they're slow to adopt when it comes to security. It wasn't very long ago, they had maybe a 2-page questionnaire about security questions, and now that's turning into 10 pages.
Yeah,
And
those
pen test is
applications are
definitely in
getting
there.
longer
They're
and
getting longer.
longer.
It means they're starting to learn, right? They're starting to learn that some of this stuff matters and that their risk vulnerability from an insurance perspective is directly pertaining to the controls that are being in place and how mature that company is. But I'm still amazed at how many companies that I see and work with that have never done a penetration test. So hopefully this gives them some insight and some clarity on why that could be important and something they can plan for.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time. This has been great.
Well, thanks for having me on. I always enjoy coming over and working with your team and hearing what you guys are doing. And, I would just finish with one thing. One of the things you had asked about, how do you find a good vendor? I think you and I are both on the same page when it comes to process. So when you're talking to vendors, whether it's technology advisors or cybersecurity, talk about process, because I think anybody can go buy a tool, anybody can take a class, but having that process is going to help a customer from where they are to get to where they need to be. I think that's what's key.
Yeah, it's funny. I think so much of the evaluation of services is what tools in the list of services, but that's like maybe 20%, and 80% is the processes that are backing those tools. Simple example is you can have an EDR solution, endpoint detection response, but if nobody's looking at it, you might get maybe a 30% improvement, especially in the area of ransomware. But you can get a 300% improvement on that same product if it's just managed well. And I think that's a common thing that companies miss. And they miss it because they don't know what they don't know. It's the same reason why I think a pen test can be really enlightening for a business, because they don't know what they don't know. So that sounds great. Well, thanks for coming today, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Sounds great.